Welcome. I'm playing double duty of welcoming y'all from the Austin Design Week side and from the host side and moderating today's panel. So we appreciate y'all for coming out, and we are glad you're here and checking out some Austin Design Week sessions. Hopefully this is not your first, and if it is, welcome. You have a couple more days of sessions that you can check out, whether you are in Austin. We have some in person, and then we have a bunch of virtual options as well, which is great. And most of the sessions are being recorded, whether they are virtual or in person, so you can check them out later, which is great. So they'll be up on Austin Design Week's YouTube channel. So stay tuned for those recordings and materials and all of that great stuff. So I'm Nicole. I am a volunteer operations lead for Austin Design Week. So a lot of the website, Eventbrite, behind the scenes stuff I was a part of for the last couple of years. So I work really closely with the volunteer team. Austin Design Week is 100% volunteer run by various folks around Austin and beyond. So we are excited that you are joining us, and we'd love for you to connect with us, share your experience over the week. You can tag us on social media on all the things. So they're using the hashtag ADW21 and hashtag futuring for this year's theme. So connect on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all of that good stuff. For the Zoom chat, we're going to be putting a link and several other resources for you. So we encourage you to continue the conversation there, as well as the Slack channel. There is a Slack channel y'all can join and continue the conversation on any of the events that you have checked out or will be checking out. And again, all the events are free, so make sure to check the schedule and see which ones you want to join. And finally, we got to say a huge thanks to our generous sponsors for making this year happen. So all of them listed here: the Zebra, PayPal, IBM, which Carl and I are part of, and all these other great organizations. So thank you all for our sponsors. And finally, at the end of the event, you will be asked to take a brief survey. So we'd love to hear from you about the session. So stay tuned for that link as well. So normally this is when the host would pass it over to our moderator, but that's me. So I'm going to just keep going and keep talking to kick off the conversation. I actually wanted to show this thing. Our panelists haven't even seen it yet. So this was posted on Austin Design Week's Instagram the other day. So at the opening event Monday night, they had these awesome plexiglass boards throughout the event, and obviously with black lights and markers. And so they had all these different questions and icebreakers and things. There was one specifically, and if it's hard to see, I'm going to read it to you because I know the text is pretty darn small. This is from Chris the Journo. This was their Instagram handle. And they put, just did a doodle about the future of education using plexiglass, a marker, and a black light. So the question was, what is the future of education? And Chris put cost equals free. So I thought that was one of the answers and one of those kind of conversation pieces that we may get into today. So I thought that was a great way to kick off our conversation on imagining what's next for design education. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to come off screen share so we can all look at each other. And let's start with our panelist introductions. So let's start with Liz.
Hi, thanks so much for inviting me to be here. I'm thrilled to be with you all who are taking a moment this morning to think about the future of design education. My name is Liz Gerber, and I am the faculty founder of a nonprofit called Design for America, which is a national network of studios working on projects for social impact with their community members. And I'm also a professor at Northwestern. May I hand it over to Carl? Carl.
Sure thing. Yeah, Carl Rodenberg is how I pronounce that collection of letters that you might see under my picture. And I'm design director at IBM, responsible for design leadership, culture, external programs, and academic programs. And I have loved working with Liz in the past on Design for America. And I also love the others that are on the panel here as well with GA, because we also partner with them as well. So maybe turn it over to Vincent.
Thank you so much, Carl. Good morning, everyone. As it was mentioned earlier, I am tuning in from Hawaii. It is a pleasure to be with you this morning. I'm super excited to get into this conversation with these lovely individuals that I'm on the call with. So thank you for the invitation. I am currently the director of the Design Leadership Forum at Envision, a global community of over 3,800 design leaders representing 4 regions and over 2,000 companies. So I'll pass it off to Tyler.
Awesome. Thank you, Vincent. So my name is Tyler Hartrick. I'm the faculty lead design and UX/DI programs, New York City. And I've been teaching the boot camp, the full immersive boot camp known as User Experience Design Immersive at General Assembly for 5 years now. And I'm sure we'll be talking more about that particular style of education in just a few moments. And I'm a product designer at heart. And so instructors that teach at General Assembly really come from industry. And so that form of experience and that experiential learning coming into the academic sort of setting is often what makes that boot camp experience stand on its own. So I'll leave it at that for my introduction for now. And back to you, Nicole.
Wonderful. All right, y'all, let's dive into this conversation. I should say too, there is a chat feature and a Q&A feature. So if y'all have questions or comments along the way, put them in either. We will have time at the end for the last 15 or so minutes to take audience questions. So as you're hearing things and you want to engage in the conversation, share them in the chat, or again, use the specific Q&A feature, and we'll use those to get your questions answered. So let's start off with our first one. This will be a general one. Whoever wants to take it first, I'm going to leave it open, and then I'll have some more directed questions. So let's start with the current state of design education. So traditional design programs tend to focus on the appearance of artifacts. So how can we take steps to shift from that education to something that's more system, services, communities focused? Again, I'm leaving it open. Who wants to? Liz, you want to stab that one as our traditional?
Well, I was going to give a somewhat cheeky answer back, which is to just look at the system. I mean, looks are not. I mean, it's funny I use even the word looks. Looks are not everything. Aesthetic is not everything. We certainly know, if nothing else, this last 2 years has taught us that we live in an interconnected ecosystem. Everything is connected. I mean, if anybody didn't get that message in the last 2 years, I'm not sure where you've been. So everything is connected. And I think this is a moment to really use that as a case study to show just how connected we are, and that we can't design for a single object in isolation. We need to, or the aesthetics of a single design in isolation. We really need to think about the interaction of parts and pieces. And so I think this is a very costly case study that we can draw on in design education for years to come. Somebody disagree with me. Tyler, disagree, please.
No, I think that's an excellent aspect of systems thinking. Often think of that as the molecule to the region, so or people to platform to pixel, and all of that matters, and every connection point through to every aspect of those touch points, the implications. If you don't believe me, you can watch Ashton Kutcher in The Butterfly Effect in terms of how every aspect of that really does relate to one another in many different connection points. And I think from an educational standpoint, what that means is that it's a reboot in terms of understanding how we problem solve and how we critically think and how we draw meaningful, deep connections to people and get as close to and hear from those people as we possibly can, regardless of what the intended solution may be, whether that's an application or whether it's this idea of rethinking how we re-engage with regenerative design of building a wetland. And so in the connection points between all of that, as humans, we have obviously should have a deep commitment to enforcing those aspects. So designing with humility, designing with systems in mind, as Liz mentioned, and being incredibly mindful of our influence in that system. So I think it's a mindset. I think it's a methodology. I think it's problem solving, critical thinking, many aspects of things that come from potentially outside of design to infuse that in our thinking and in our process and in our mindsets.
Yeah, I would add, actually, were you going to go, Vincent?
I was going to
go for it.
offer something, but what I was going to add on to what has been shared is I think that, as it relates to being in the classroom, that making final deliverables when educating around design, less about the artifact and more open and about the impact, for example. So currently I'm teaching a class at the School of Visual Arts for the Masters of Product Design program called UX Beyond Screens, where I purposely not assigned the final solution to what it should be. Excluding it being a digital platform and letting the students decide what the final output is going to be, especially since the project is around designing for more inclusive communities. And so I think by extracting the final output and making it an actual, mobile app or a website, it allows the flexibility and sort of the fluidity for the students to be able to see all the interconnected pieces as it relates to solving a problem using design challenges. Because I think that once we start to shift the scope of a project, outside of that, and we start to include the various layers that exist within a problem space, we allow for the data to indicate where the solution exists and allow for things to be less about the artifacts.
I love that, Vincent. The thing I would add is that the IBM company 8 years ago did an experiment. We wanted to hire, a few thousand designers. Now we've hired like 3,000, and we did sort of an analysis of, well, what kind of skills are we coming in with, and what skills do we actually need at IBM? And we ended up having to build a boot camp, a 3-month one that I've been quoted in the press as calling the missing semester, that tried to close some of those gaps, right? And we are continuing to do that. In fact, Nicole is a leader in that program, and that's evolving over time as well. And it started off with like just addressing challenges or gaps, like being able to work with other disciplines. And it's not just design that has that as a problem. Engineering too. When you hire somebody, out of an engineering school, all they've done is all they've hung out with is other engineers. MBA students do the same thing. So when they actually have to come together, and they have to come together to actually create something, they need to know the vocabulary of each other's discipline. They need to be able to know how to work together, how to expect things from different disciplines and the like. And then working on really important, difficult problems is another one, and actually even using, design systems and design frameworks and that sort of thing. So we were finding those as really being a challenge. And so we developed our own, but certainly it's not our intention to do that forever. The expectation, I think, is some of that should be onboarding for a company, but I think a good amount of the rest of it needs to be coming from other organizations. And as you probably all know, we actually hire from the other people that are on the panel here. So GA is another really important boot camp that we hire from as well.
Nicole, may I pick up on something Vincent said?
Absolutely.
And Carl kind of hit on it too about language. And lately I've been really struggling, Vincent, around language. And I heard you say a couple times final deliverable. And I'm wondering if you can help me think through this, which is, are we doing our students a service by asking them to deliver a final deliverable? And what I mean by that is, does it suggest artificial endpoint that doesn't really ever exist in design? And so I don't have a good solution yet, but I want to throw out what I've been working on, which is just like version 3.0 or version 4.0. That's what's going to be due at the end of the semester. And then of course you're going to, it leaves space for people to go on and work on version 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever it's going to be. But I'm just curious, I think I'm a word nerd and I'm being overly concerned with this, but I'd love to hear if you ever feel uncomfortable using the word final deliverable and feel that conveys something about the design process that's inherently not true.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point. And one of the things that I always try to do with giving context is saying that this is actually not going to be the end, right? So although I say it's the final deliverable, it's the final deliverable for the end of this time period that we are together. but this is not the end. And so I made that very explicit, especially with the current students that I have at the beginning of the course, which actually started last week. I told them that at the end of this project, this is going to be the beginning of you continuing to do this work, you know, as you learn, because even at the end of the project, I schedule the curriculum in such a way where the final presentation is not the last day. The final day is actually a discussion that we're going to have about the final project so that we can continue the discussion, because in truth and in fact, as you mentioned, we know that the design process and we know that working and solving solutions for problems does not end when, you know, the scope or the timeline ends. It actually continues to keep going, because, and that's the beauty of this, of the work that we do, is that the constant iteration as we learn about the behaviors and the thinking of people, that we can go back in and iterate, et cetera. So I've made that intentional with the students so that they can wrap their minds around the fact that this is not the final output, that this is sort of like the stopping point for this part of the journey, but that they are open to continuing it if they so choose to.
I love that. Thanks, Vincent. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to follow up on one thing as well, actually, if I may, that Nicole introduced right under her opening chart with that, the concept of that education should be free. And I think that one of the major problems right now with education across the board, certainly in North America, mostly in the US, but there are other countries in the world that have free education all the way through to, you know, graduate level. And I just find that it's an incredible barrier to getting greater inclusivity across the board. And I think that's our major challenge, quite frankly, in our industry, is actually encouraging and then allowing and then supporting people that have the talent and the interest to get into this field to actually be able to do it.
That's a great segue into the next question I had. So how does the lack of diversity among design educators influence students' learning experiences? What thoughts do y'all have on that? Vincent, I saw you're like, I
took a breath for that one. So I'll jump in. I think it supports a narrative that isn't true. And that narrative that isn't true that I'm referring to is the narratives that suggest that Black people or people of color or any marginalized group of people aren't interested in design as a career. Because as we know, representation matters. And I've been a student in design education since I was 9 years old. And over the years, I've had many teachers who taught me different aspects of design. And the first and only Black male educator that I had wasn't until 10 years later when I was in college. And his name was Nichols, and someone whom I still keep in touch with for this day. But for me, when seeing a Black man in this field that I am still so passionate about, it encouraged me even more. And it painted a concrete picture for me of my future, one that was still quite blurry because of the lack of representation for me up until that point. And so I also want to, by saying that, be clear that, you know, many of the teachers that I had prior to that time were great, and they definitely helped equip me with the tools to help me have a successful future. However, having someone that looked like me teach me how to do the thing that I love, it felt extremely empowering. And there was a deep connection and an assumed empathy for my experience that I couldn't articulate to some of my previous instructors. And it was like he understood my journey to the point and the role that was before me. And so not giving students the experience of having diverse voices educate them creates a complacency, I believe, in them when they become practitioners, meaning it's easy for design leaders to then look at the lack of diversity in our design field and be okay with it because they might have gone through an educational experience where there was already a lack of diversity. So it's never seen as a problem in the education. So therefore, it may not be a problem when you're actually practicing. And so that's something that I believe is a starting point where we can start to see more diversity within our field, is by starting within the classroom and those people who are leading and instructing as it relates to the work that we do.
That was
Vincent,
beautiful. Beautifully
go ahead,
said.
Lynn.
Oh, I'll just build on saying, Vincent, you made me think, when was the first, first of all, I have never had a Black design instructor, zero. I am struggling to even think if I've had a female design instructor. So thank you for that moment of reflection. And then the other part that's obviously that I just want to point out is I think that I am the first female designer that was pregnant that I ever knew. It was me. And so I want to bring that up as just another interesting dimension, which is, it's one thing to wear the black turtleneck and the fancy black glasses and look like a designer, but it's another thing to be like rotund, 9 months pregnant and trying to look like hip. Like, it doesn't really work. And I remember some of my students coming up to me and just saying, thank you for being pregnant, which I thought was such a weird statement. And I was like, well, yeah, this is my project, thanks. But I really think there was something about them seeing a design professional pregnant, which was kind of also remarkable and different in a different way. So thanks for bringing back those memories, Vincent.
You're welcome. I think that's so cool. And I think that's so important as well. Absolutely.
I was going to ask for both of you, actually, that clearly the leader or the instructor is really important in terms of setting the tone and actually having sort of a role model and that sort of thing. But I would think it's also going to be the students in the class that would also be the same. And then also when you graduate, you want to go into a company that actually feels like you're included, as well. And, my Black friends are always saying, I was always the only Black person, in the whatever we're in, right? So I think that too has to probably, I would think, factor in as well.
Yeah, that's something that I personally find to be one of the most important aspects of the classroom is who is in the classroom in total, who is included in that space. And for example, in teaching a class where team projects are part of what we're doing and looking at women, and looking at folks of various situations on income, of race, of perspective, of work experience, of educational experience. Those are some of the things that I'm fortunate to be able to tune my frequency towards as an instructor, and really what makes the profession of UX design in particular, but other disciplines within design, incredibly unique is people coming from other perspectives, other industries, work experience, life experiences. And it really makes for what, the future of, in the case of, again, user experience design, product design, incredibly exciting, is that those disciplines are folks that have come from other things and all have and share their own unique experiences. So it definitely makes the experience truly unique when you do have that form of diversity and can bring those pieces to it. So I'm always reflecting on that in terms of what that looks like and how a class can sort of build on culture and community from those various aspects of things, all sort of coexisting and manifesting together.
Absolutely. So Tyler, that's a great, let's keep digging into that bootcamp piece, because we've talked about it a little bit, but as you know firsthand, Vincent, I know, I would think all of us on the panel are aware of this in various ways, but this idea of boot camps have become kind of disruptors, right, in the educational space. So how have, or perhaps should they, these traditional players react to boot camps and those offerings?
As the academic will say, copy them.
Yeah, I'm happy to suggest my thoughts on that, and I do think other programs have looked to adopt models that are potentially shorter form, but more importantly, that they're rooted in experiential knowledge, in experiential hands-on experience. In my alma mater at Cal Poly, I studied urban design and systems and urban ecology and things like that. the sort of catchphrase of the whole school is learn by doing. So just get hands-on, get practical, focus on things that can actually be built and actually be experimented on and tested on while in your educational experience. So I think a lot of that, I look back to those days as some of the early workings of that taking place for myself. And I think in the bootcamp model, that's exactly what we intend to do. So oftentimes we think we're not a school, we're a professional workspace. This is workplace training, much like a trade school operates. And we look to industry and we think to ourselves, let's not consider this a school project. Let's consider this the MVP build, and we have a 2-week sprint to complete this build. And not that the terminology necessarily is the most important aspect of it, but to really tune the frequency to being hyper mindful of how we can get hands-on experience here and now and infuse as much of what is happening in industry as possible as well. So that means having a client project that you're working on and being hands-on with an actual client where you can interface and grow your soft skills, hard skills, interpersonal skills, all of those things. And to be able to really understand how you can get into the throes of the job before you ever go and start that job. So again, that training model is how we see it. If education's here and your first job's here, we want to bring that, not just butt up against it, but actually start to overlap so that it feels as though, again, once you move into that first role, it's like, oh, I learned those things in my experience. And although I might still have imposter syndrome from time to time, I've done those things and I'm going to embrace that and bring my own sort of confidence into that space. And so I think the educational model, and so much more to say, and I'll hand it off to a panelist in just a moment. I do think the model of being as direct in terms of what will be expected of you, and even going further to model new and inventive ways of practicing design in the educational space and experiment and incubate in that model is where I think the future of things go, things that industry hasn't even tried yet. So excited to see where those sort of where that thinking sort of comes into play in the future.
I always thought that I worked with a number of companies some 6 years ago and over the last 6 years, and C-suites of companies would be really worried about being disrupted by some startup, right? That's what I think has happened in the educational field. I think the boot camps like yours, Tyler, really are oh my God, there's this whole, different way of doing things. You can move faster. You can do all the things you just talked about. You can also, iterate on your curriculum every time you teach a course, right? Whereas in university, it's like, here's all these, curriculum boards that you've got to get through, and you might be 3 years before you actually introduce a whole new program, right? So I think that's a real benefit. I think the traditional educational system needs to be disrupted, but at the same time, I think there's also some elements in the bootcamp approach that could really benefit from the model that universities have as well. So not only just training for that, first job sort of thing that sometimes is a bit, myopic. But we've hired a lot of people from GA, and I actually followed up with their managers to find out sort of what do they think, because I was honestly really kind of just interested to if you're going to do a 4-year degree and then you're going to do a GA, program, how does that compare? And the feedback really was that a lot of the people that we're hiring from GA and other boot camps, the real benefit is they have a broader perspective. You talked about this a minute ago, Tyler, the whole notion of people having a broader perspective on things. And it's partly kind of age, or a lot of people, I think, go in and adopt a new sort of discipline that they want to go into. So they're job changers, so they've already got broader perspective, or they might even have 1 or 2 other degrees that they've done prior to entering. And so we're finding that while there may occasionally be a lack of some, or some additional education that could have been done, but it was just constrained because of the time frame, it's made up for by the broader perspective that students that we hire from boot camps come with.
So Liz, let's talk about it from the university side. What are you seeing? I know you started by saying copy it, but also Carl, you make a good point on it's a two-way kind of dynamic there.
Sure, I'll represent the 1,000-year history of higher education. here are my thoughts. I think Carl's straight on or right on. I think there's a blend. I have been, as somebody within the university system, I think about education as a 24/7 enterprise, and not something that happens between the 9 and 10 a.m. block on Monday, Wednesday, Friday when a particular class is taught. And that's something that I love about the General Assembly model, is it's definitely looking at, it's not just spreading out the who the student could be, the traditional student is, but it's also the span of learning, what they learn, how they learn. And so I really think I think we need to radically rethink formal education, and absolutely to be inspired by General Assembly and the like. I also think that there's so many other things going on that universities do provide that are well beyond the classes. I mean, if I could ask anybody in this audience, what's one thing you remember from freshman year? I think you might struggle to tell me. But if I ask you what were powerful learning experiences that you had in your first year of college, I bet you could tell me something really interesting about some late night adventure with a group, a team, or a venture, a trip that you went on, etc. So I think just having it goes back to our systems thinking, looking at learning as a system and a lifelong learning experience, rather than kind of artificially thinking of it as like a 10-week endeavor or something between 9 and 10. And so I actually think we all need to get together, all the educational institutes, as well as this industry. I think we have interesting lines that we've built up, and really reconsider the barriers that we put up between industry, education, and government to say, why are we divided in this way? What if we rethink this from a learner perspective? How could we reconfigure ourselves to have a beautiful journey through these institutions at different times based on different needs of the organizations and of the person? That's that. Very high five. So basically blow up the whole system.
Sure.
And start over, because I think we really, so many of these things that we've created are either band-aids or they're artifacts of a world we don't live in anymore, an agricultural society that many people don't live in anymore, or they're band-aids for a system that's broken. So I think, but it is going to require putting ego to the side, which is going to be tough. And let me be clear, I'm sorry, I'm trying not to use militaristic words, and I realize blowing up is a militaristic word, so I just want to say dismantle, if I can correct myself.
Absolutely.
Dismantle the existing system.
I like that. So Carl, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, because we're going to talk about the future, your initiative, the future of design education, because I think it's what Liz is getting at. And I know you two are working closely on that. So can you speak a little bit more to that initiative and how it came about and what that initiative hopes to achieve?
Sure will. So I think I talked about that we created these boot camps at IBM when we realized that there was gaps in education and the like, and I made that reference to the being quoted in the press as coming up with a missing semester of design school. And I was reached out to by a dean of a school saying, could you help us create a new curriculum? And so we did that, and I still teach in that program. But a lot of thinking about, what do we need to do to really fundamentally change the way education is done, especially for design. And part of my academic programs that have been running for the last few years was actually doing a session at University of California at San Diego, which is where Don Norman was at the time, and he and I got talking over a weekend about the state of design education. And we realized that we both had the same perspective, that we really need to kind of, to use Liz's words, and maybe sort of refresh at least the approach to design education in all aspects, right? So, and designing it really for the future. Even some of the things that we're talking about thus far are almost band-aids, but we need to kind of rethink what the whole future of design and education should be. That includes non-degree programs. That includes a focus on the environment, a focus on a decolonizing education, a focus on designing for the environment, all of that. And so we decided to start the Future of Design Education effort. We basically started to identify who we wanted to have on like a steering committee, and Liz was one of those. And we had a view too to how do we make sure that that steering committee is also appropriately diverse, because if we're actually going to design, a new way of developing curricula, we wanted to make sure that it was diverse in almost every way. And in some ways, we can't be entirely, because we are all privileged. Most of us that are in some position, even if we think of people that are from more diverse backgrounds, we still have risen to a level of privilege. And so we can't ultimately be totally reflective, but we still try to do that on a regular basis. So we put up a website. We basically did a call for sort of volunteers. And so we had some 700 people volunteer to help. And we were like, oh my God, what do we do with 700 people? But then it was like, and about half were practitioners and a half were educators. And then we basically identified with this steering committee what the core themes are that we thought we needed to work on, and then have been creating working groups for each of those. So there's a working group for non-degree education. There's a working group, on systems thinking, a working group looking at strategic foresight. So the variety of aspects, and then we're going to weave it all together is the intention. It's just a mammoth project, but really trying to weave it all together and provide guidance that will be open source, that anybody can pick up to inform new curricula in the variety of educational institutions that we're sort of trying to serve.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I'm going to switch over to a couple audience questions, and then I have one question we'll end with that I think will kind of wrap up the conversation. So this one, this came from an anonymous attendee. So regarding, Carl, your mention of the free education, right? The image I showed at the beginning of the conversation. Can design education be automated? What would a Duolingo for design need to do successfully to teach design to everyone for free? Is it practical or ethical to write algorithms that can evaluate students and provide feedback? Couple questions there. Very. I
do some research in this area, so
I love it.
I can speak as a researcher. One of the major sticking points of all education, but particularly design, is feedback and getting feedback. And so we've been thinking a lot about how do you provide high quality feedback when expert mentors are few and far between or don't have a lot of time, and more people want to learn design. How do you actually get that feedback, quality feedback to people who are learning? And we've found that curiously through some structured, academic term is scaffolds, structure basically, you can actually get peers to give feedback that's of quality, of the same quality as experts, if you get sufficient amount of feedback. And so rather our system is more a mixed initiative system, you might say. There's some computation involved, but there's also people involved. And it's really, I mean, it is Duolingo in the sense that Duolingo is based on crowdsourcing. And this idea, if you get a lot of people doing a lot of things, you can aggregate some kind of quality response there. And so we have had some success there, not at a scale where we're ready to, throw it out to the world. But I really do think the solution, if you will, to that, the feedback problem, if you will, is engaging a large number of engaging people throughout the world, really, but doing it in a very structured way. The challenge is with some kind of algorithm with design is algorithms assume that there's a right answer. There is a way, it's a known there's a known solution. And we know designs rarely are repeatable. And so it would be really just hard to train an algorithm to actually say, yes, that's good or bad, because the solution is going to be new every time, as opposed to if you want to tell a computer to tell you if 2 + 2 is 4, it can tell you pretty well. 2 + 2 is 4. But anyway, we're really actually doing interesting stuff in this space because the thought is, well, if more people want to get involved, how do we scale design education? And really feedback is one of the crux, one of the hard parts to fix. Thanks for letting me geek out there for
my immediate reaction is that part of the problems that design has created have been algorithms, quite frankly. I think we're having major problems in the world due to, I think, inappropriate design of algorithms. The whole focus on not even thinking about unintended consequences. My view is that we shouldn't have as many damn well unintended consequences. We should be designing to anticipate what might go wrong. So now, can you do it right? Yeah, absolutely you can. And I think what Liz is doing is I think the right way to do it. But I think there's certain elements that will be routine that, yeah, that would be great to automate. But I think there's enough countries in the world that have proven that you can actually make education free if we think it's valuable enough for the whole country. So I think there's actually a direction to have human beings even being paid to teach free education. And so I think there's a value in going that direction. But I would reiterate again that I think you can actually automate some of this stuff. And I think during the pandemic, everybody has learned that, hey, you can do a whole lot of this stuff remotely, you can do a whole lot of this stuff digitally, and you can automate some of that. I mean, our design thinking badging program is basically an online, it's not algorithmic based, but it's really I think doing the right thing. And so there are times when you don't want to spend all your time as an instructor teaching certain material over and over again. You want to get into, as Liz was saying, kind of the feedback, being able to iterate, being able to provide guidance and all that kind of thing. That's where the human, I think, really comes in.
All right, let's take another. Oh, Vincent, you want to jump in?
I was just going to say, I agree 100%. Like the only thing that I just would sort of put a check box next to, or emphasize or underline, I should say, it's just the human aspect to it. Like we talked earlier about, inclusive design and diverse voices and thinking and all the backgrounds, et cetera. And one of the things that we've seen with some case studies around, basing a lot of the decisions on algorithms is that it can be problematic if the people who are building or responsible for that program or that system is not representative of the large group of people who are going to be interfacing with that. And so I think there still has to be a human connection or human aspect to when we're looking at something like that that's automated, when we're programming it, and then the people who are involved with the thought process behind it and why that's going to be implemented and who is going to impact. So there always has to be some sort of human aspect or element or connection to streamlining the way we educate people. And I definitely agree with Liz in terms of like the feedback and, and just sort of not onboarding, but the guidance that people will need, along the journey as they're learning more about this work.
Hey, Vincent, I wanted to amplify something else you just said, that yes, it has to be human, has to be diverse, but it's also the case that I think we need to look for different areas of inspiration for design and design education from, diverse sources. I mean, this whole notion of North American, European-based, education. I'm reading a book right now, The Dawn of Everything, which is phenomenal in terms of trying to rethink, what the sources of cultures prior to, the ones that we're living in currently. I think we can get a lot more inspiration for new directions from those areas. And so a more diverse, not only people and lived experience, but even history from those organizations as well. So great points.
100%. Yeah.
We have another question from Darwin. This one says, is there a space for design students or learners to gain agency to know what they need and craft a personalized pathway, and then fall in love or be a product of an education system developed for a different age? Really thinking about making education student learner centric. So I'm curious your thoughts on that. So crafting their own pathways.
Well, there are some schools that do that. I know we've hired some people that have basically crafted their own education. And the other thing I would add is the whole trend toward sort of modularized education in terms of, badging for particular skills, that you develop your own, micro education, sort of modules. And that I know some schools are experimenting with that, saying, okay, what's the collection of skills? And then when you're going for a job, then you say, here's the collection of things you've actually got, some education in, but it could be, really diverse and very personal.
Yeah, I'll add to that, just with thinking through how every designer is uniquely their representation of who they are through their work, through their practice, and how they engage in a space. And although individualize learning and curriculum, assuming that isn't individualistic necessarily, there still is that opportunity of being who you are in that practice and being able to make decisions that are yours, that your peer may not agree with initially. And so there's so many different areas within education that I do think there are opportunities to be who you are specifically and uniquely. And that it's, you go out, you learn, you understand that, you take that in, you maybe make some adjustments, and each sort of cycle through, whether that's a project or whether that's just a 30-minute amount of time you're talking with someone directly. Maybe it's a target audience of who might be the eventual audience of the product you're building for. And I think there's, as I just mentioned, this idea of micro learning and micro moments of adding into your total sort of knowledge base and experience. And I think there's certainly opportunities as you're learning to continuously think of doing something just slightly differently, a slight variation on a method that might otherwise be the traditional way of doing something. You place a tweak on it and you consider a new way of doing something, even if it's a slight shift. And I think there's a lot of very small ways in which you can play through taking a curriculum that is otherwise standard across, let's say, 20 students, and very much make it your own in terms of how you refer to your design process. Does not need to be the classical design thinking process as it may be known, but you have your own unique way of considering and talking through and deliberating and messaging what that process looks like. And so there are countless areas where we can have our own unique take on what that looks like in our own individualistic perspective.
So as we talk about people, Bill brought up a good point in the chat a bit ago. So the broadness, skills, and breadth of usage goes beyond visual arts, behavioral analysis, and business understanding, means you need to be somewhat of an expert generalist. So do we have enough of these type of people around to make design thinking work?
I would actually say that we've been observing what's been happening to our designers at IBM. So we have these 3,000 designers. We take tabs on sort of how they're evolving. We subscribe to this notion of the T-shaped person, right? So you basically have the vertical stroke of your T is your superpower. Let's say you're a visual designer. That's what you went through college for, and then the horizontal stroke of the T is all the other education, so and skills like design thinking is. I think we looked at kind of that vertical stroke of the T for a lot of designers, and to your point, Tyler, talking about continuous education during education, but also when you're now in the working world, to do that as well. And what was fascinating to see was actually how that shape of the T modified over time. And so that people were, that person that started off as visual design, really got into, might even be front end development, might be looking into, UX design, but it might actually be going into adjacent disciplines as well. And I think that's really healthy. And even if you're not going to make a job change into a different discipline, actually widening that stroke, that vertical stroke of the T, and picking up other adjacent skills is, I think, incredibly healthy. And that ends up being kind of that generalist, right? Where you may well still be your superpower is still, let's say, UX design, but you've got, a smattering of visual design, you've got some front-end development skills and the like. That's where you get to be an incredibly powerful designer if you've actually widened that vertical stroke of the T.
All right, where we are on time, I want to get to one final question. So we're talking about the future, right? Futuring is the whole theme of this year's Austin Design Week. So as we move forward into the future of design education, what should we leave behind? So let's do round robin on this one. Who wants to start? And then you can popcorn it over to somebody.
I'll start.
Awesome.
And I'll say passive exclusion. And so what I mean by that is that, design education is often, and we've talked about it a few times through this session, where design education is often reserved for the people that know about the value and the opportunities within the design industry. And these individuals usually come from networks where a career in design is made known or is sometimes encouraged to pursue. And so we become okay with that. And it's the mindset that supports those who know, they know. And so what we as design practitioners, I believe, have a responsibility for doing is to be more intentional about the people who are excluded and the people who don't have access to design education, and to allow for us to have more diverse voices, diverse thought, so that we can see our industry reshape and change in a way that impacts and benefits us all. And so if we're going to take design education into the next realm of possibilities, we need to be, again, more intentional about who actually gets access to design education, which is why I support free design education or something along those lines, because I think it'll give access to more people who may not have the means or not even have the knowledge to know that this is a possible pathway for them. So leave passive exclusion behind.
I want to build on what you said, actually, Vincent. And I know your experience is not necessarily representative, but the fact that you started design education so young. But I think we need to actually leave behind this notion that you start design education at college age. I think we should be starting it. In fact, we accomplish somewhat more of what you were describing, Vincent, if we actually did introduce it and not have it as this exclusive thing that you've got to have a major in, or you've got to take a course in when you're college age. I think we should start earlier.
So I'm all for people learning design thinking, and then I'm going to offer the flip side of this, which is I would like to leave behind what I call design missionary work, which is imposing design education on people who don't necessarily want it, or imposing it in a way that discounts their local experience, their culture, superficially addressing problems but not root causes, and really leaving unsustainable solutions. So design missionary work, let's leave it behind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think inspired by Vincent's take on passive exclusion as something to leave behind, I think the leave behind is linear thinking. To leave that behind and understand that the next form is constant evolution of where we're going. And this idea of continuously reimagining what can become, and really thinking about things in different new ways and inspiring ways. Not that we can't take from the past and leverage it and use it as we move forward, but the complex challenges that we're faced with in this age and in 20, 30 years in this century are going to be vast, and we're going to need a lot of designers to step up and move into professions and careers that do not exist today. Designers that are solving problems that there's no job description for today. And it'll be economies of designers leveraging, hopefully, mindsets, again, that are continuously rethinking and reimagining the future, and groves of people jumping into those roles and establishing a completely new a completely new industry and a new livelihood for what matters in this world. And I think, so the word there for me, I said some words there, but just this constant evolution, whether that's curriculum and design, professions, mindsets, how we move forward as a human race, I think will require that sort of deep-seated understanding of how we can really solve new problems with new thinking.
Wonderful. That is a great way to wrap up. So we are right at time. And Liz, I know we're getting you off to go teach and everybody off to their day or future Austin Design Week events. But thank you all. Thank you, panelists. We've been talking about this discussion for a while and really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you all for your time. Thank you all to our attendees for joining. I did post a quick survey in there. It's also posted in the Austin Design Week Slack channel, but we'd love your feedback on what you thought of our session. So be honest and take a couple minutes to finish that survey. And thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays. Hopefully we'll see you at some future Austin Design Week events. Today and 2 more days of events happening. Thank you all.